picture this. You decide you want to master a new skill.
Right.
Or, maybe you have to overcome some massive, terrifying life obstacle.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Exactly. And immediately your brain just cues up this, 80s pop rock soundtrack.
Classic training montage.
The ultimate Hollywood training montage. You start picturing a few quick cuts of you sweating in a gym, maybe a really dramatic sunset.
Running up stadium stairs.
Yes. A determined sprint up the stairs. And then, boom, in exactly 3.5 minutes, the music swells, and you have magically gone from this complete stumbling novice to an absolute champion.
I mean, we all love that montage.
We do. It is incredibly satisfying to watch.
Well, it's the ultimate cinematic shortcut, right? We get all the emotional payoff of the hero's struggle.
But none of the actual work.
Exactly. We don't have to sit through the actual excruciatingly long, boring timeline of the struggle itself.
Yeah, nobody wants to watch a 2-hour movie of someone just, failing a math test.
No. So it creates this very compelling illusion for us, this idea that success is just about 1 or 2 bursts of intense, camera-ready effort.
Right.
And we internalize this idea that progress is, always visible, that it's always dramatic, and it always comes with a great soundtrack.
But what happens when the music stops and you are just staring at a textbook on a rainy Tuesday night?
That's the real question.
Especially when you look at a highly structured, high-pressure environment, like a boarding school. Suddenly that dramatic montage is just, it's nowhere to be found.
No, it's just the grueling reality of Tuesday.
And then Wednesday.
And then Thursday.
Right. Which brings us to our single source document for today's deep dive. It is a really fascinating, highly insightful paper titled, What a Boarder Can Learn from Mr. Miyagi.
I love this piece. It is such a brilliant framing device.
It really is.
Taking the quiet, understated wisdom of that iconic 80s movie mentor, Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid, and translating it directly to the gritty, unglamorous realities of boarding school life.
So our mission today is to extract exactly how that wisdom translates. Because boarding life, it involves incredibly strict routines.
Oh, absolutely. Monumental expectations.
And long periods of hard work where literally nobody is cheering for you.
No, there's no audience.
No audience at all. And the core argument here is that the way a student approaches this daily grind dictates whether they merely survive the experience or whether they, truly master it.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. The premise starts by completely dismantling that Hollywood myth of sudden mastery we just talked about.
It tears it right down.
It really does. It lays down a foundational rule, which is that real strength is built slowly.
Yeah, Miyagi's core teaching revolves around the fact that improvement simply does not come from those dramatic bursts of effort.
Right. The montages are a lie.
Total lie. It comes from repetition, from practice, from a deep, often boring commitment to doing the ordinary things over and over again.
And translating that to the boarding school experience.
Well, it means looking at what discipline actually entails on a daily basis. It is not about pulling a frantic, highly caffeinated all-nighter to finish a massive history project.
Which we've all done.
Oh, sure. But real discipline looks like attending evening prep consistently every single night.
Yeah.
It means completing your tasks when your internal motivation is sitting at absolute zero.
And managing your time responsibly when you'd rather be doing literally anything else.
Exactly. Following basic routines that support your well-being. Just doing the basics, basically.
I think about it kind of like the difference between cramming for an exam and just showing up to that evening prep session.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Think about the last time you crammed for a test or even a big presentation at work. Cramming is highly dramatic.
It feels important.
It feels massive. You're surrounded by empty coffee cups. Your heart rate is way up. You feel like a warrior fighting against the clock.
Yeah, you're the hero of your own all-nighter.
Exactly. But the knowledge you gain from that is incredibly fragile. It usually evaporates the second the test is over or the minute the meeting ends.
Completely gone by lunchtime.
Right. Whereas the unsexy, quiet daily discipline of just, sitting at your desk for an hour every night, even when you aren't under the gun, that builds something permanent.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychological friction of that exact scenario.
Why does it feel so different?
Exactly. Why does cramming feel so productive while daily study feels like a total slog? It all comes down to the dopamine loop.
Ah, the dopamine.
Right. When you cram, you are triggering a massive stress response.
Yeah.
You have cortisol pumping, and every time you memorize a flashcard right before the deadline, you get a hit of cheap dopamine.
Because you survived another flashcard.
Exactly. It feels thrilling. But sustained discipline actually starves the brain of that cheap dopamine.
Wow. So it's actually less chemically rewarding in the moment.
Way less. When a student sits down on a Tuesday to do prep and the exam isn't for another 3 weeks, there is zero urgency. There is no immediate reward.
Just silence.
Yeah, you are forcing your brain to build deeper, slower neural pathways without the benefit of an adrenaline rush.
Well, put yourself in the shoes of a 16-year-old. Heck, put yourself in the shoes of a 30-year-old.
Fair enough.
I struggle with this. Why is it so incredibly hard for any of us to accept that progress feels slow or even completely invisible at first? It honestly feels like we are biologically wired to reject the Miyagi method.
Because we are wired to reject it.
Really?
Yes, our evolutionary biology demands immediate feedback. If we expend energy, we want to see the result of that energy expenditure right now to ensure our survival.
Right, like finding food or running from a bear.
Exactly. So when a student puts in an hour of intense focus and doesn't suddenly feel like a genius, the brain's natural response is to say, this isn't working, stop wasting energy.
Go back to sleep.
Pretty much.
Mm.
But the gradual discipline we are talking about isn't just about memorizing academic facts, it is building structural resilience.
Ah.
They are physically and psychologically wiring their brains to tolerate sustained effort. They're building the capacity to do hard things simply because the hard things need to be done, regardless of how they feel about it in the moment.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because that friction leads directly to arguably the most famous concept from the Miyagi philosophy.
The wax-on, wax-off principle.
Yes, the wax-on, wax-off principle. If discipline requires repeating tasks daily without an immediate dopamine hit, how does a student handle the inevitable frustration when those tasks don't just feel slow, but feel utterly devoid of meaning?
And that is the breaking point for so many learners.
Because in the movie, Miyagi assigns these seemingly pointless chores, right?
Right. Washing classic cars, painting long wooden fences, sanding wooden floors. Yes, and to the student, they seem totally ordinary and completely unrelated to the goal of learning karate. They just feel like exploitative manual labor.
Why am I washing this guy's car?
Exactly. The deeper value of those repetitive motions is only revealed much later, usually in a sudden moment of crisis.
And the reality of boarding life maps onto this perfectly. I mean, boarders hit this exact same wall.
Oh, constantly.
They face study routines that just feel endlessly repetitive. They spend hours doing redundant math drills, and their skill development just seems to drag along at a snail's pace.
Or they put in a massive effort on an essay.
Yes, they spend a week writing an essay they are incredibly proud of, they hand it in, and the feedback they get back is just a sea of red ink highlighting their flaws.
It's devastating.
The results just take forever to materialize. But I actually have to push back on this from the student's perspective.
Okay, go ahead.
If you are listening to this and you've ever felt stuck in a rut, you know this feeling. Isn't it completely natural to rebel against a routine if you literally cannot see the point?
It is entirely natural.
Right, if you're just endlessly sanding a floor and no one is telling you why, you aren't learning karate, you're just getting splinters.
Just splinters.
Why wouldn't a rational person just throw their hands up and quit before they ever reach that magical aha moment?
Well, this raises an important question about the role of the environment itself. Because you're right, a rational person would quit if they were in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Understanding that growth is gradual is the absolute key to remaining persistent. Patience is the bridge between the repetitive, boring action and the visible, exciting result.
But a teenager can't always build that bridge.
No, a teenager can rarely build that bridge of patience entirely on their own. They just don't have the life experience to know that the bridge actually leads anywhere.
That makes a lot of sense.
That is exactly why they need a highly calibrated environment, like a well-structured boarding school that engineers that trust. The environment has to hold them in that uncomfortable space of not knowing and help them trust the process, even when they cannot see the finish line.
So the school essentially acts as the container that stops them from quitting on themselves.
Precisely. You have to trust that the repetition is doing something beneath the surface, even if your brain is screaming that it's a huge waste of time.
Like with the red ink on the essay.
Yes. When that essay comes back, covered in red ink, highlighting your flaws, a teenager's instinct is to view it as a personal attack or a sign of total failure.
I'm just not good at English.
Right. It takes a tremendous amount of maturity and a lot of environmental support to reframe that feedback not as a punishment, but as a necessary course correction.
Which is hard.
Very hard. You have to endure the deep discomfort of feeling like you aren't getting anywhere, relying on the faith that these accumulated hours of seemingly pointless study routines are actually laying down a foundational bedrock of critical thinking.
That brings us to a major transition in how a student operates.
The shift in mindset.
Yeah. Once someone actually pushes through that agonizing frustration, accepts the repetitive grind of wax on, wax off, and finally begins to see actual progress, how should they carry themselves?
Right. How do they act now?
Exactly. We move from the actual physical action of learning to the psychological attitude of the learner. This is where the concept of quiet mastery comes in.
I love this concept. True expertise, as modeled by the mentor, is almost always calm and understated.
It doesn't need to shout.
No. Real confidence does not need to be loud, aggressive, or performative to be effective.
According to the insights here, boarders develop this quiet mastery by concentrating entirely on their own personal progress, rather than comparing themselves to the people sitting next to them.
Which is much easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It requires a profound level of humility. And humility here means accepting guidance respectfully, practicing consistently without needing applause, and, reflecting on your own mistakes.
Right.
The text specifically notes that humility is the shield that keeps students from becoming discouraged. But let's pause and look at the intense sociology of a boarding school for a second.
It is a totally unique ecosystem.
It is a 247 panopticon.
Yeah, you're never alone.
You are living entirely with your peers. You eat breakfast with them, you sleep in the same dorms, you study in the same small rooms.
It's intense.
In an environment that is practically designed from the ground up around group living, and where academic or athletic rankings are highly visible to everyone. How on earth does a teenager successfully block out the noise?
That's the challenge.
How do you focus purely on personal, quiet progress when the guy across the hall just got a better grade than you,
Yeah.
and literally everyone knows it? Asking a teenager to ignore peer status feels biologically counterintuitive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are absolutely right. Teenagers are biologically driven to care about peer hierarchy.
Right.
It is incredibly difficult to ignore, which is exactly why humility is framed not as a moral virtue here, but as a psychological survival mechanism.
Wait, really? A survival mechanism?
Yes. Humility in this context isn't about self-deprecation. It's not about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking about yourself less in relation to others.
Oh, I see.
It acts as a shield against discouragement because it completely changes the metric of success.
Let's take that a step further. How does that shield actually work in practice? I mean, if you've ever lived in a dorm or even worked in a highly competitive corporate office, you know how suffocating that comparison can be.
Think about the mechanics of external versus internal validation.
Okay.
When a student's confidence is tied exclusively to external validation, needing to be the smartest in the room, needing the highest test score, being the loudest voice in a debate, that confidence is inherently fragile.
Because you can't control it.
Exactly. It is completely dependent on variables they do not control. The moment a transfer student arrives who is naturally better at math, or the moment they receive an uncharacteristically poor mark, their entire identity shatters.
Because they're no longer the best.
Right. But the quiet mastery we are discussing relies on internal validation.
So it's the student who is quietly proud that they finally understood a physics concept on Thursday that they were completely lost on during Monday's class,
Yes,
regardless of the fact that their roommate has understood it for a month.
exactly that. Humility allows them to accept a bad grade or a tough critique, not as a devastating attack on their social status, but as a practical tool for their own private growth.
It takes the sting out of it.
It does. External confidence is like a fresh coat of paint on a house. I mean, it looks great to the neighbors, but it chips the second the weather turns bad.
Oh.
Quiet mastery is the structural, load-bearing beam inside the wall. It is entirely unsexy. Nobody walking by gives you credit for it, but it is what prevents the entire house from collapsing under the immense weight of eventual exams and life pressures.
I really love that structural load-bearing analogy
Yeah.
because the loud confidence is constantly looking out the window to see who is watching, while the quiet mastery is just focusing on holding the roof up.
Beautifully put.
But, a student doesn't learn how to build that load-bearing beam entirely on their own. They aren't isolated on a mountaintop figuring this out through silent meditation.
Right.
They require a catalyst.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the crucial role of the mentor and the absolute necessity of maintaining personal balance.
The dynamic between the student and the guide is the cornerstone of this entire philosophy. Trust is the non-negotiable foundation of this relationship.
It has to be there.
It has to be. A student simply cannot navigate the complexities of quiet mastery without the active guidance of experienced adults who have walked that path before.
The insights emphasize that boarders have to actively seek advice from staff. They have to remain genuinely open to constructive feedback and realize that these massive support systems exist for a reason.
You're not supposed to do it alone.
Right. You're not supposed to white-knuckle your way through a high-pressure environment alone. So what does this all mean? We arrive at this incredibly beautiful paradox.
Which is?
That true, lasting independence actually grows directly through relying on others.
Yes. We so often confuse independence with isolation.
We really do.
We think being independent means never needing help from anyone. But true independence, the ability to self-regulate your emotions, to make complex decisions under pressure, to handle sudden adversity without panicking, is a highly technical skill.
It's learned.
It has to be modeled, and it has to be taught. You become an independent thinker by actively absorbing the wisdom of your mentors, listening to how they solve problems, until eventually their external guidance merges into your own internal monologue.
And part of what those mentors have to teach is how to find equilibrium. Because if you're just grinding away, pouring the foundation every single day, you will burn out.
Oh, fast.
Miyagi's philosophy heavily demands balance. Physical, emotional, and mental balance. You need that to handle the intense academic pressure and the exhausting social responsibilities of boarding life. This means practical, boring maintenance.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, it's like a finely tuned instrument. You can't just play it endlessly. You have to rest it. You have to tune it by maintaining strict, healthy sleep schedules and getting actual exercise.
Right.
And you have to adjust it, like managing your emotional reactions thoughtfully instead of just flying off the handle.
Taking deliberate breaks when you feel your concentration declining.
Exactly.
It is the concept of managing the asset. You are the asset.
I love that.
If we think about the compound interest analogy we touched on earlier regarding daily study, you are making daily deposits into your intellectual bank account.
Right.
But you cannot simply keep investing all your capital, working yourself to the bone, without managing the overall health of the portfolio. Sleep, exercise, and emotional regulation are the risk management strategies that protect the investment.
If you neglect them.
The system crashes and you lose the accumulated gains.
It's literally risk management for the human body and mind.
Yeah.
You just can't sustain quiet mastery if you are chronically sleep deprived and emotionally volatile.
It's impossible.
You have to balance the relentless effort of learning with the strict discipline of maintenance.
When you strip it all back, this isn't just an abstract 80s movie philosophy. It is an ultimate survival guide for high-pressure environments.
It really is.
Understanding the mechanics of quiet mastery and learning how to utilize the trust of mentors directly leads to highly sustainable study habits. It fundamentally changes how a student manages stress.
It changes everything.
Mentoring ultimately builds a deep, unshakable emotional security within the student. It prepares them not just to pass a chemistry midterm, but to face complex adult challenges decades down the line.
It builds a structurally sound, resilient human being.
Exactly. The goal of any great educational environment isn't simply to produce a student who can temporarily memorize facts.
Right. Cramming doesn't count.
No.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal is to produce an individual who understands how to approach difficulty without panic. Someone who knows how to accept harsh critique without their ego shattering, and who knows exactly how to sustain their effort even when the reward is months or years away.
Which brings us back to you, listening to this deep dive right now. Whether you are currently trying to navigate the claustrophobic pressure cooker of a boarding school, or maybe you're tackling an overwhelming, massive project at work that feels like it has no end in sight.
Or just trying to master a difficult new hobby in your garage.
Exactly. Real growth is almost always happening silently beneath the surface. It is rarely a dramatic Hollywood montage.
No soundtracks.
Sadly, no soundtrack. Patience, deep discipline, and trusting the process, especially on those dark days when it feels like you were just endlessly, pointlessly sanding floors, is the only real proven path to becoming your best self.
The visible results will absolutely come, but only if you respect the invisible work.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The structural foundation has to be poured before the house can be built.
Couldn't have said it better.
But before we wrap up today, let's leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder on your own. We have spent this entire deep dive looking strictly at what the student learned from the mentor. We've dissected the humility, the discipline, the dopamine loops, the trust. But consider this dynamic from the other side of the equation. What does the mentor learn from the student?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Think about the sheer emotional stamina it takes to teach this way. How does the act of repeatedly guiding a frustrated, impatient, highly emotional teenager through the invisible stages of wax on, wax off force the guide to confront and refine their own quiet mastery?
Wow.
Something to think about. Next time you find yourself frustrated by the agonizingly slow pace of your own progress, remember that the montage isn't real. The real victory is found in the quiet, unglamorous repetition of a Tuesday night. Keep sanding the floor. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.